Hello, everyone. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowery, our Mississippi State beat writer. This is double coverage, a look at Mississippi State and Ole Miss, all things from our local SEC teams. We're back with you after a holiday break. Logan had a bowl game. Maybe Ole Miss will have a bowl game next year. That appeal is ongoing. Logan, how are you, man?
I'm good, I guess. It's kind of nice just to be kind of have basketball on the table, like you said. Kind of put football to bed last week, and that just kind of feels like a weight off your shoulders. You spend so much time and devote so much time to football. I mean, I had been doing football, I think, since July. I think it was July 23rd. And it seems like it's just something every day with football, and there's still a few loose ends to tie up with the football thing. Mississippi State has a couple of staff positions still open, and it does look like they're going to keep cornerbacks coach Terrell Buckley on staff, so that's a little news there. But so far, football has kind of died down a little bit. They'll be reviving that thing starting around February when they sign the remaining members of the 2018 class. But it's nice to get a little break and just kind of focus on basketball for a change.
Well, Jesus said, "Football you have with you always, Logan." So there's always something football going on for Ole Miss right now. Of course, it's the NCAA appeal. No real news there. They're trying to get that second-year bowl ban rescinded, and maybe even the restriction that was placed on the Rebels on unofficial visits by recruits. That's something that is pretty important because that's where a lot of those relationships in recruiting are built. But the only real football news right now, as you mentioned, staff changes. Charles Clark, former Ole Miss safety in the early Ed Ogeron years, the late Cutcliffe years, he'll be back on staff coaching defensive back. So he's coming from Oregon, and it's pretty impressive resume, having worked with Jim Leavitt there at Oregon, and before that for 4 years with Jim Leavitt at Colorado. So Charles Clark coming back to Ole Miss as an assistant coach. Folks, before we get much deeper in the program, I want to remind you about a couple of other podcasts to be on the lookout for. Be sure to check out The Memo, our news podcast, all things Northeast Mississippi. That comes to you every Wednesday and Friday. And be sure to check out Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs. That's every Wednesday, and Logan and I are here with you Thursday or Friday, depending on what's going on and when we can get together. And we'll actually be together on Saturday, Logan, before we get into basketball. But it is the egg on the court Saturday at 3:30 at the Pavilion, Mississippi State and Ole Miss. We're going to talk about that. We'll touch on a little women's basketball as well. And before that, Logan, why don't you let's recap the Tax Slayer Bowl. Tell us about your trip out there. When you hear Florida bowl game, these players think sunshine and warm weather, but that's not always the case for North Florida, is it?
No, it wasn't. And the last two trips I've made to the Gator/Tax Slayer Bowl, it's been a little chilly. And when they went out there in 2010, the first time around, it was nice, sunny weather, exactly what you expect from Florida. But the last two trips have been a little chilly. Early on in the week last week, it really wasn't that bad. It was a little chilly. I mean, you kind of needed a light jacket, because the wind was blowing, but it really just wasn't that bad. But as the week went on, you needed that jacket pretty much anytime you stepped outside. And it was a little chilly. It was probably in the 50s or so there with a nice breeze blowing. But, as I learned as I made my trip back home, I drove through Atlanta and I stopped and got some gas in Atlanta. And it was about 20 degrees colder in Atlanta than it was in Jacksonville. So I guess I was fortunate to have as warm a weather as I did last week. But, the Tax Slayer Bowl went really well for Mississippi State, and I didn't see that coming at all. Just looking at all the factors that Mississippi State had going against it in entering that ball game. You didn't have a head coach. You didn't have an offensive coordinator. You didn't have a defensive coordinator. You didn't have a starting quarterback. And just all those factors. And then you throw in, you're facing a former Heisman Trophy winner in Lamar Jackson, one of the best players in college football. It just didn't look very well for Mississippi State. And it didn't practice particularly well last week from what I saw. They did open about 20 minutes of practice each day for us to watch. And, of course, that's before they started doing any team stuff. We got to basically see them stretch and go through a few individual position drills. But just looked like the guys were there, loose, having fun. And I guess there's something to be said for that. But they didn't look they were really focused on the game coming up that Saturday. They just looked like they were there to have some fun and, kind of cap off their season. But, when Saturday rolled around, Greg Knox and that coaching staff had those guys ready to play. And there's something to be said for that. They should be really commended, that coaching staff, for sticking around. Many of them are not going to be back on Joe Moorhead's staff. But they somehow got that team ready to play on Saturday, and they played really, really well. Now, they had some mistakes during that ball game. Some crucial things happened. Gabe Miles muffed a punt. Reggie Todd fumbles at the 13-yard line going in right before halftime, which allows Louisville to score a touchdown. So it's they had some mistakes during that ball game. Keaton Thompson threw an interception on first down of a drive. So it wasn't a perfect game, but man, they played well in some areas. Keaton, that was really his only mistake. He played like a starting quarterback, even though that was his first career start as a true freshman. He looked every bit as good as Lamar Jackson in that game. Lamar Jackson threw 4 interceptions during that ball game. Mark McLaurin had 3 of those and was actually named the Tax-Slayer Bowl MVP. Mark McLaurin also forced a fumble in that game that somehow got turned into a late hit penalty out of bounds instead of a forced fumble along the sideline and Mississippi State getting possession. Mississippi State gets called for a late hit out of bounds on Mark McLaurin and gives Louisville 15 yards, and they go down and score. I believe it was their first touchdown in that game. So a blown call there, and could have been even more for Mississippi State. And, Keaton led that game-winning drive late in the fourth quarter there. Mississippi State goes on to win 31-27 in that ball game. But like I said, they played well in a lot of areas, and I think it boded well for this team moving forward. Gave them a lot of confidence. Sent those seniors out on a winning note and sent most of that coaching staff out on a winning note. Greg Knox did a really good job as the interim head coach at Mississippi State. He's since gone on and joined Dan Mullen's staff at Florida as expected, as most of the staff did, and even some more guys even coming from that staff. But, it was a really good bowl game for Mississippi State to cap off the season with 9 wins. They should have won the Egg Bowl. Would have been 10 wins if they could have held on to the football a little bit more than they did in that ball game. But, it was a good game for Mississippi State, over 400 yards of offense, created 4 turnovers, and, just a good game all around.
Yeah, Greg Knox deserves credit for the job he did in bringing that team together and coaching in that game. I thought it was interesting, Logan, to watch. You saw Jeremy Pruitt stay behind and coach with Alabama. That's not so unusual for guys making the jump like that in those games, in those big bowl games with implications like that. But for Scott Frost and that whole staff to stay behind with UCF instead of going on to Nebraska, stay behind and coach those guys against Auburn, help them win that game. I thought that said a lot. I'd like to see that a little bit more. Of course, the higher up you go in the bowl pecking order, again, the higher the stakes are. And, you get down to some of these lower tier games. I know the interest there isn't as much interest there. Tax-Slayer Bowl really is kind of like right in the middle, and I'd like to see more of these coaches stay behind, with the teams, at least leave more key assistants behind or things like that. But I liked watching Scott Frost and the emotion that he had clearly with this UCF team, how passionate he was with this group. What is interesting right now there, Logan, is UCF claiming the national championship. Going to have the parade, hang a banner that says national champion. T-shirts are coming, says Danny White, the AD, who used to be with the foundation at Ole Miss. So Michael White's brother there, I got to know him when he was on staff at Ole Miss. It's been a part of the national conversation right now, UCF claiming the championship. What are your thoughts there?
I think they should be celebrated. Hang a banner that says undefeated season, all this. And yeah, I was a part of two undefeated teams in high school and won two state championships. And yeah, if we wouldn't have got to claim those championships, I would have been pretty upset too. But you kind of, you're only in control of so much. You can only play the teams that are on your schedule, and UCF did that and beat every one of them. And there's something to be said for that. It wasn't the highest level of competition, obviously, but they beat everybody that's on their schedule. That's all that those players really can control. That's it.
Well,
And that should be celebrated. But at the same time, this system's put into place. You can't claim a national championship like you once did. Like Alabama's 1941 national championship. You can't do that kind of stuff anymore.
yeah, it's a different day, and there is a system in place, and we do name a champion from this system. And if you want to tweak the system, that's fine. If you want to debate it and change it, that's great. There are avenues to do that. And frankly, if this would move to an 8-team playoff, I think that would be better. If it had it been 8 teams right now, you wouldn't be having this discussion because UCF would have been. They'd have been one of those 8 teams. So, we'll see where it all goes. I like that this team is being celebrated and that Danny White is pushing this and making a big deal out of this. But if anybody can claim national champion, then you have anarchy. So anyway, that's your UCF moment, Logan. Let's talk basketball. Egg on the court. Rebels and Bulldogs tomorrow at 3:30 at the Pavilion. Mississippi State's gotten off to a good start. Ole Miss, not so much. How do you see the matchups here?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just really, with Mississippi State, they've only played 2 games outside of Humphrey Coliseum, and they didn't play very well in either one of those. They went up to Northern Kentucky and played against Cincinnati, and that was Mississippi State's only loss. They're 13-1 right now. And then they went down to Jackson right before Christmas and played Southern Miss down there and won the game, but didn't play very well. Southern Miss isn't very good, and Mississippi State had to kind of squeak it out right there at the very end. So they haven't played well away from the hump. So this will be a hostile environment going up to the Pavilion on Saturday. I don't know. State's just they've somehow come out with a 13-1 record against a pretty soft schedule thus far. But you look at what they did Tuesday night. They played Arkansas, who's ranked number 22 in the country, and State didn't shoot the ball particularly well. They were 4 for 21 from behind the arc in that ball game, but still managed to pull out a win somehow. They hit a couple of clutch three. Two of their 4 threes on the night were made in the final couple minutes, and were able to somehow squeak that one away. The Weatherspoon brothers played exceptionally well in that game. They scored 22 points apiece in that game. So, those 2 players are playing good. Bill Ledoux had a clutch basket right there at the very end to kind of put Mississippi State ahead. That was kind of the game-winning shot. Mississippi State won that game 78-75. But, State's play where they kind of make their money, so to speak, is on the defensive end. They hold teams down. Arkansas came in averaging, one of the best scoring teams in the SEC, and Mississippi State held them to 75 points. I think they were averaging somewhere close to, 8 in the high 80s, low 90s. Job holding their offense down, and they've done that for pretty much every team that they've played. But it's hard to get a read on how good this Mississippi State team is because of how weak the schedule that they've played.
Well, I'll tell you what, Logan. I mean, look at it at Ole Miss right now. For them to have success against a team defensive oriented, especially as the Bulldogs are, they've got to have more from Terrence Davis. I mean, this is a guy, clearly their most explosive and athletic player on a team full of guards. Those are the best players on this team, and Davis is the most athletic. He goes into SEC play averaging 16.5 points, their leading scorer. And after 2 SEC games, he's averaging just 4 points in those games, 4 points each in the win at home over South Carolina and the loss at Georgia. There was foul trouble for Davis against the Gamecocks. He was on the floor for only 5 minutes in the first half. When he came back in the second half, he still couldn't get into a rhythm offensively. The Gamecocks did a good job of of keeping him frustrated. He made some plays defensively that helped set up some things for his teammates, and Ole Miss has enough guards that eventually somebody came around and hit the big shot, and that's what they need. You think with this many guys who can hit that shot, whether a Breein Tyree, who played so well against Mississippi State in Starkville last year, really kind of took over that game in the overtime, or DeAndre Burnett, Markel Crawford, so many guards who can hit the big shot. You figure somebody's going to come around and hit that eventually, but this team hasn't really shown a rhythm where a couple of those guys are on at the same time. And really they need Davis to be the impetus for that. They need him to get downhill to score in transition. They need him to hit from outside because that's a part of his game, but the bigger part, and this is where I think he's backtracked a little bit, is attacking the rim. That's really, such a big part of what he is. That's how he uses his athleticism and his skill set, and you just don't see that much from him in the half-court set. Now, if he can get going in the open floor, he'll take it baseline to baseline and usually score, finish the job when he gets there. So extremely gifted in that way. But you just don't see him with an aggressive nature in the half-court setting, and I think they need more of that from him. Now, neither he nor Andy Kennedy seem really concerned with his decision-making on that right now, but that's a noticeable difference in Terrence Davis from last year to this year. And right now, whether it's attacking the rim or hitting from outside or a mid-range jump or whatever it is, they need more offense from Terrence Davis because good teams aren't going to allow him to get in the open floor much, and that's what we're seeing right now. So how it shapes up tomorrow is anybody's guess. I will say, as far as the guards go for Ole Miss, and there are a lot of them, Markel Crawford, the graduate transfer from Memphis, has been a big impact, as he was expected to be at his signing, but he's been a bigger impact early in the season than many of the graduate transfers who have come before him. Now, Andy Kennedy has had several. He likes that rule, and if there's one that he can get, he'll usually bring them into the fold. But I think Crawford, being a kid who grew up in Memphis, played at Memphis, he was not unfamiliar with Ole Miss. Now, I don't know how many times he was down here or whatnot. I know he was a part of the Memphis team that played in the Pavilion when Ole Miss won last year. I just think the familiarity that Markel Crawford has with the Mid-South, with Ole Miss and Oxford, really has helped him in that period of acclimation that all players have, even graduate transfers who come in with a degree in hand and a successful college career somewhere else. Even those guys, it takes a while in new surroundings to become acclimated, become comfortable, and really produce at a high level. Well, Markel Crawford hasn't had to deal with new surroundings, and he's really made an impact. You don't see him with 15 or 17 points every night, but you might see that from him every other game or every third game. And as he described his role to us recently, it's really about, who's hitting shots and who's playing well. He sees himself in a support role if Terrence Davis is getting going in the open floor, if he is hitting from behind the three-point line. So it's really, for Crawford, about finding his niche from game to game, who he needs to help free up, who he needs to help get a shot, get the ball. But when it's him in that role, he's very comfortable with it, and he can score off the bounce or from behind the arc. So Crawford has made a big impact early as a Rebels graduate transfer. Frankly, they've got to get a little bit more from their post play. We knew they would be good with the guards, and they have been, but Dominic Olejniczak, the 7-foot transfer from Drake, really has not produced at the level that I think they thought he would. Everyone knew this was going to be kind of post-work by committee after the loss of Sebastian Saiz. The Rebels have gotten some good minutes from Bruce Stevens, the junior college transfer, and he does give them a low post option at times, he has struggled defensively. That's been an issue, so that limits his time on the floor. As Kennedy has pointed out, this isn't football. You can't sub in and out when the other team has the ball. You got to play both ends in this game. So we'll see how the Rebels match up tomorrow.
Yeah, and another advantage that Ole Miss will have tomorrow is it'll be their third conference game and only Mississippi State's second. Mississippi State didn't play that New Year's Eve, New Year's Day type of thing earlier in the week. So State will be just in a second conference game, and down low it's kind of they've had Abdul Adu, who played well in his first couple of games and is kind of just fallen off offensively. They'd like to get some more production out of Abdul down low. He did have that big stick back to kind of win the game Tuesday night, but they need more from him, especially if those three balls aren't falling the way that they are. Eric Coleman has been able to play his more natural position. He's kind of had to play the 5 the last 2 years, and this year he's been able to play more of the 4. That's kind of his natural spot, and can shoot the outside shot. At his size, he's 6'10", and he really creates a matchup problem at the 4. He's kind of long and slender, so he gets banged around in there at the 5. So he's really excelled playing the 4 spot. And Schneider Harrod just had kind of regressed this season. He started I think 19 games for Mississippi State in the post last year at the 5, and he just, for whatever reason, it didn't click. You see a big jump most times from season 1 to season 2 with freshman to sophomore, and it just didn't work for Schneider Harrod. He has elected to transfer. I saw earlier today he's going to visit Baylor. He's going to visit Arizona State. He's a big-time guy out of high school, 4-star prospects, one of the top centers in the country, and for whatever reason, it just didn't transfer or click at the next level. So we'll kind of see where he lands and see how his career goes from there. But Mississippi State is down another post player. Obviously, they lost Garrison Brooks, who was in last year's signing class, who's starting at North Carolina right now. So Mississippi State needs some more post players to come in. They've got a 5-star in Reggie Perry coming in next year, but that's not going to help them out the rest of this year.
I'll tell you what, Logan, one other thing regarding the Rebels' slow start this season, 5 non-conference losses. You were mentioning the Mississippi State schedule and obviously not as challenging in the non-conferences as some that they've had before. The Rebels' 3 losses at home were in overtime. One of those against Virginia Tech, where they had like a 13 or 14-point lead that they lost, let the Hokies come back late and win that game. Point is, they're losing games to mid-majors like Illinois State and South Dakota State that are not going to scare anyone in terms of their RPI or things like that. Not going to be huge resume wins because of the conferences they play in. But, Logan, from watching these teams, it can be a team that's not really all that in terms of its rankings, ratings, and whatnot. But, most of these mid-major teams who are going to finish near the top of their league are they're going to be competitive. And there we go. Little computer glitch there. But we're going to work through it, folks. So we're back with you. Okay. Point is, there are good teams among these mid-majors. And Ole Miss has played some good teams, has lost to some good teams, some games that they normally have won. But I think, we'll see if that's going to help them in SEC play, if the struggles on the pre-conference schedule have made them a little more seasoned. That's something to keep an eye on. This is an important year for Andy Kennedy. They did not extend his contract at the end of last year. Ross Bjork has said that he wants this team to be a bigger part of the NCAA conversation. He wants them to wake up on Selection Sunday and know that they are in the tournament or right there, if things fall, with the possibility of getting in the tournament. And that's something that just hasn't happened, for Ole Miss since 2015 when they went to the first 4 and had that comeback win against BYU that sent them on to Jacksonville for the second round. We haven't seen that from Ole Miss basketball since that time. This is an important year for Andy Kennedy. The state game tomorrow, in and of itself, one game, it's not going to make or break anything. But as you look down the SEC schedule, we've talked last week about how the SEC has really changed. The landscape is different. You look across that schedule now and you see 6 teams in the RPI top 50 and state right on the outside of that right now at 52 or 53. When you look across the schedule, there's not a game where you look and say, that's where the Rebels can make up some ground. That's not Auburn this year. It has been in recent years. It's not. Auburn has improved. Alabama has improved. Tennessee has improved. So anyway, big year for Andy Kennedy and Ole Miss and Mississippi State getting it together tomorrow at 3:30 at the Pavilion. Logan, women's basketball, the Rebels falling 88-62 to South Carolina last night. I went over and covered the game, just kind of reminded me how good Asia Wilson is for South Carolina, number one. But, the difference in the top of the conference and the middle rung of the conference, there's still a big gap.
Yeah, in Mississippi State, last night when covered them against Arkansas, it was their second SEC game. They went out to Georgia and didn't play well early in Athens, but kind of got things together. And that's kind of the case last night against Arkansas. They didn't play particularly well early on. It was just a 22-20 game after the first quarter, and then State had a 10-point lead at halftime, and then just really took off from there in the second half. Mississippi State ended up winning that game 111-69. It was the most points Mississippi State has ever scored in an SEC game. Their previous high was 98 in a double overtime loss to Vanderbilt back about 12 years ago. So it was really an offensive sport. And Arkansas had a good game plan. Mike Neighbors, who Mississippi State met in the Sweet 16 last year, he was the coach at Washington. So he coached Kelsey Plum and those guys, and Vic Schaefer and Mike Neighbors have been on the same staff at Arkansas together previously. So they were very familiar with one another. Mississippi State had a Arkansas transfer and Jordan Danbury on their team. So a lot of familiar ties there. But, they had a good game plan against Tierra McCowan, who has had a monster season. And they were determined that Tierra McCowan was not going to beat them last night. And she only made one basket in the first half, and that was right before the halftime buzzer sounded. So they made a concerted effort to kind of double and triple team her and make other players beat them, and that's exactly what they did. They left that free throw line jumper open for Morgan Williams, and she hit it. Neighbor said after the game that he wasn't going to guard Morgan Williams because she really hasn't scored that much this season. They were going to leave her open and give her shot until she made 8 shots. She made 8 shots in the first half. So they decided they needed to start guarding her. But, Victoria Vivians goes off again, 29 points last night. She's really taking her game to the next level. We knew she was really good. She was kind of more of a volume shooter her first 3 years. She's taking great shots right now. She's hardly missing anything. She's driving to the basket. She's only taking a three-pointer when she's open now. She's not trying to force anything. Rashonda Johnson's hitting threes. Blair Schaefer's hitting threes. Morgan Williams kind of picks her spots to hit shots. And Jasmine Holmes comes off the bench and backs her up and is giving them really good minutes off the bench as the backup point guard. Their bench still isn't what Vic Schaefer would like it to be, but it's getting better. He's been able to, in all these blowouts, he's been able to get those freshmen and first-year players kind of, some minutes there. So he's a little bit more comfortable with his bench than he has been. So this team's starting to come together. No, Vic Schaefer, after the game last night, was very unhappy. You would think your team scored 111 points and only committed 4 turnovers. You think your coach should be pretty happy, but he was really just pissed off more than anything. He just hates the way this team plays defense, and that's kind of what his bread and butter is. And he was unhappy. He said if they played defense the way that if they continue to play defense the way they are, he's going to be 6 foot under before this season's over. That's how upset he is about it. And I don't know. Like I said, I thought they played pretty well last night, but I guess it's his way of motivating this team.
Folks, that's it for this edition of Double Coverage, a production of the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Be sure to check out the Memo, our news podcast coming to you every Wednesday and Friday, and look for Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs. That's every Wednesday. Logan and I will be back with you next week, Thursday or Friday, for another round of Double Coverage.